In Hong Kong, there are around 50 different species of snake. Of those 50, probably around 20 species are regularly received here through the Wild Snake Rescue Project. There are 5 species that stand out as the more common to receive here, and that's the Burmese python, the common rat snake, the Chinese cobra, the redneck keelback, and the bamboo pit viper.
In about 1998, we were approached by a fairly high-ranking member of the police force. He had come to us describing what was happening in Hong Kong with stray snakes and nuisance snake cases. Basically, this particular individual had realized that the way things were happening in Hong Kong, if people had a snake in their house, they were calling the police were going on scene to assist and maintain safety, and then they were calling the Seh Wongs from the local live snake restaurant industry. And what then happened to the snake was going back to the restaurant and becoming part of the food trade. And the police realized that they were therefore assisting nature and wildlife to go into the food pod. And so they came to us in 1998, and that's where we came up with the plan, which has basically been in force since that time. So I think officially in 1999, they began sending snakes here to Kadoorie Farm instead of them going back to the restaurants. The Seh Wongs themselves were consulted. They agreed that they would still help the police catch the snakes in the nuisance situations, but they would be paid for that service instead of being able to take the snakes home. And we've continued in that manner, bringing the snakes to Kadoorie Farm since we began. So it seems to be a successful plan. The snake catchers are sort of on alert permanently for a phone call from the police, which when they have to respond as quickly as they can, get to the venue as quickly as they can, making sure they've arrived with all the appropriate tools. The ones that we've certified for rapid release know that they need to have safe snake handling, tongs, safe bags to contain the snakes, and appropriate gloves to keep themselves protected. They may have some other tools they require. A torch is very handy because a lot of the call-outs will be in the middle of the night when snakes are very active. When they arrive on scene, I think they have to meet up with the police and make an agreement with the householder or whoever it was that made the call in, and then start to find the snake. I know one of the difficulties sometimes is just discovering where the snake's gone, because sometimes the public are afraid to stay close and keep watch on it, and they may have spotted it in one place and it's moved since. So there can be a bit of a hunt to try and find the snake. Often they will be tangled within machinery or equipment, so there's a process of extraction that has to happen, which is complicated if you're using tools in the dark at night with a torch. So I think it can take a little while sometimes, not always, but they'll slowly extract the snake with the tools, the tongs, get the snake bagged, secured, and then if it's a rapid release, they can then make their way to a site nearby that's more than 500 meters from where it came from in appropriate green habitat. And if it's not a rapid release snake catcher, they have to turn the snake over to the police, who will then box it, and they'll bring it up to us here at Kadoorie Farm. One of the trends that we've seen from the very beginning of this project was that year on year we've had more and more snakes arriving. I think right back at the beginning, the police didn't have data about how many snakes they were handling each year. So when we said yes to the fact that we'd assist them, we weren't sure what was coming. And in the first couple of years, we had, I think, between 100 and 150 snakes arrive in the active season. Year on year, that's increased to a point where I think we reached a peak of about 1,700 snakes arriving through the police program here. This was great. It's a brilliant sign that there's more and more snakes in Hong Kong, that the public are more and more willing to assist in a snake case rather than ignore it or hurt it. But it was definitely a big manpower issue for us here in the team, and also for the police. Suddenly they're making 1,700 trips to the farm. And so we were looking at ways, and the police wanted to look at ways that we could make this a more efficient program and make it better for the snakes as well. So in the last couple of years, we have actually reached out to the snake catchers, and we developed a certification process whereby snake catchers that pass our certification are able to help in rapidly releasing the snakes back to the wild, close to where they were caught. That means the police don't have to come here, we don't have to process that particular snake, but it means more importantly that the snake gets put back close to nature in a place that it's familiar with. So we now have have actually had a slight reduction in the number of snakes coming to us and an improvement in snake welfare because snakes are going back to the wild close to their natural and normal habitat where they were found. That can't always happen. If a snake's picked up in the middle of Central, for instance, it needs to get translocated to somewhere where the habitat's better. But it's definitely an improvement in snake welfare across the territory. And I hope we can expand that further in coming years to have more snake catchers able to do that. When we're preparing to release snakes, we have a think about what species we've got, because we need to know and be aware of what type of habitats and environments they like. Some of our snakes are very aquatic, so we need to think about aquatic environments that we can go to. We have to think about the temperature at the time and the weather conditions. If it's very cold, we need to think about whether it's going to be warm enough, will there be enough sunlight to release them later on. But basically we'll also look at where the snakes we have were captured and try and plan a release site and a green environment that's near to that location. We load up with several snakes and all of our safety equipment, the tongs, the gloves. If we're releasing pythons, we also have to take a GPS because we mark all their releases with a GPS unit. And then we'll set off with a set of safely boxed snakes. Generally, we head to very remote locations away from human activity, often inside country parks. And once at those areas, we'll scan around for microhabitats that are suitable. If we have a water snake, we'll find a stream or we'll find a pond. If we have a forest snake, we'll look for some good forest growth. And then we head to those locations and release the snakes as quietly as we can. Because whilst we love the idea of releasing snakes, a lot of the public probably not so happy about it. So if we take a long time releasing them, there's a chance you have hikers coming around the corner, disturbing us, disturbing the snake, possibly getting concerned themselves. So we try to do it as swiftly as possible. One of the things we do to make ourselves safer, if we have a lot of venomous ones, is to try and find a downhill site so that we can release a snake downhill and let gravity help it move away from us and away perhaps from a footpath that we're on. And we found we're fairly successful at it. One of the hard parts is actually finding places where you're not disturbed by people. Often you can be deep in a country park, you haven't seen anybody on the drive-in, and as soon as you stop and open a snake box, hikers start to come around and you might get a string of 50 people and you have to wait or move on to a new location.
We have the Wild Snake Rescue Project, but then as a side project to that is the Burmese Python Conservation Project. And this project actually started more recently, so it was around 2010. And so when we receive Burmese pythons, we don't just do a health check and then hold the snake for release. We also take measurements as well. And so this will involve actually physically getting the snake out and pinning it onto the floor whilst we take various morphometric measurements. We'll also figure out its gender and we'll insert a microchip as well. And it's a passive microchip. That's so if we recapture one, we can scan it and then see if it's been captured before, and then we can learn more about where it's been in the interim, where it's been released, where it's recaptured, and it helps to build up a picture. And this is part of the collaboration that we have with AFCD, which enabled this project.
Prior to us getting permission to be allowed to process and release Burmese pythons in Hong Kong, the snakes in a nuisance encounter or in a conflict with humans, if it was a python, it was passed to the Agriculture and Fisheries and Conservation Department, who would then pass them to the mainland wildlife authorities for release into the mainland. And as a conservation organisation, we got concerned about this, as had WWF been for many years, because the Burmese python was an integral part of our ecosystem, and in fact it's our largest surviving predator in the territory, so it's the only thing that could potentially have a natural controlling force on things like populations of wild boar, barking deer, monkeys. It was the only thing that was left here in the territory that could help to balance our ecosystem. And so it was something we fought for a long time to be able to get permission to release the pythons back into the wild here. So when we commenced that in 2010, it was quite a momentous thing. It was brilliant that we were being able to put this species back in the wild. I think for many years, particularly the big pythons, were being slowly siphoned out of our ecosystems. I mentioned they're an important top predator, that it's the only thing that could control some of our larger mammal populations. When they're just babies and hatchlings, as much as people might be uncomfortable with it, they are an important food source in the ecosystem. An adult python is claimed to be able to lay up to 100 eggs. So that's potentially every year one adult python producing 100 little pieces of python food for the other parts of our ecosystem. So they're potentially feeding things like our serpent eagles, our goshawks, our civet cats, our leopard cats. So very important for us to have managed to get these snakes going back into the wild here. It wasn't happening in the early days prior to 2010 just because there was safety concerns. People thought it's a big, dangerous snake, dangerous animal. The public would be really worried if we're putting them back into the wild. But if you look over the history for the last 20 plus years, I think there's only ever been a couple of incidences, literally only 1 or 2 incidences, where the human population in Hong Kong has had any injury from a wild python. So we're doing a great job in Hong Kong of actually living in very close proximity to what's potentially a large predator, large potentially dangerous predator, but the python is just not interested in harming people. It is a species we can live alongside.
And annually here we receive around between 200 and 300 Burmese python every single year. All of those come through this room right here, and we do the box checks and things like that. And then of all the snakes we receive here, roughly it's over 90% actually get released back to the wild. They're in good health and they're native species. Those that aren't released back to the wild, sometimes they're exotic species, sometimes maybe they're injured, maybe that's why they've been captured, because actually someone's seen that it's injured, or maybe during the capture process they've accidentally become injured, and then they might need to sadly be euthanized in those cases. And so it's over 90% released, so that's actually quite a good figure. And those Burmese pythons that historically weren't released back to Hong Kong, now we've got 200 to 300 every year, nearly all of those getting released back to the wild.
I think snakes are found almost anywhere across the territory. I mean, they exist across the whole of Hong Kong, but the times that they're found by people is when they're near human activity, human infrastructure. So the ones that come through the program are always associated with things like roadsides or public toilets, people's houses, restaurants, maybe factories, places where they're going to encounter people. I think there's a little bit of public awareness needs to happen there. If you're in a country park and you see a snake, you're in its home. Leave it alone, let it be.